Story 1. Our country sold itself out when corporations were allowed to donate large sums of money to politicians. For a long time, this was hidden, but now it is out in the open and in front of us. For anyone who wants to see what progressive politics look like in America, look at the New York City mayoral race. The little guy won the Democratic nomination, and the rich and powerful, including some Democrats, are trying to derail it. Sadly, this has happened before in other countries and will happen again in new ones. The rich stay rich and powerful while we fight about gender and race and blame the other side for why we are not making enough money. Story 2. To some of us, that point was reached years ago. For others, it will never be reached. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Story 3. Better question. At what point is the entire government considered treasonous? This is the real problem. Story 4. Trump was treasonous at least 4 years before he got elected, and probably before that. Laws do not matter when you are rich. Story 5. About 8 years ago, when the president dismissed the person investigating him, they were supposed to withstand scrutiny, not undermine it. Story 6. Make no mistake, this president is not the one truly in power. The ultra-rich are in power. They have just chosen their least capable member to lead the takeover because they needed someone who reminds the average American of themselves. Between January 6th and now trying to sabotage Mamdani, they are conquering the government with lightning speed and mocking the public while they try to figure out why they are getting poorer. Story 7, in my opinion, or in a legal sense. Because if it is the latter, it is when he manages to anger both the United States Congress and the Supreme Court of the United States. Story 8. Russia, if you are listening, did it for me. His defense was that it was just a joke, and Republicans were completely fine with that excuse. Today, Krasnov will be joking around with Putin in private on American soil, and Republicans still will not care. Story 9. Walking on stage in Helsinki next to Vladimir Putin and telling the world he believed Russian intelligence over United States intelligence. The whole world knew he was a traitor that day. Story 10. Do not fool yourself. This message is not addressed to all Americans. It is directed to Reddit. Reddit is not a fair representation of all voting-age Americans. Story 11. When they intentionally fail to protect their own citizens from criminals, support the criminals, and release them all from prison to cause more violence against the citizens. Story 12. It is difficult to say since Donald Trump and his supporters keep changing the criteria. However, according to Donald Trump and his supporters, that point is reached by any and all other opposition presidents whenever Donald Trump says so, regardless of evidence or fact. Story 13. The Constitution defines it. Article 3, Section 3. Treason against the United States shall consist only in levying war against them, or in adhering to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort. No person shall be convicted of treason unless on the testimony of 2 witnesses to the same overt act, or on confession in open court. So, if January 6th constitutes armed rebellion, then January 6th. Depending upon what aid and comfort resolves down to, then working with Russia fits that bill, and so does siding with Vladimir Putin over our intelligence services. So does ignoring Russia placing a bounty on our troops, pulling the rug out from under our allies in Afghanistan to the benefit of our enemies also fits the bill. Unleashing armed troops on our streets, using a paramilitary group to snatch citizens off the streets. These may be considered actions directly against the United States and thus constitute treason. The treason bar is a high one. The founders did not want such a charge to be a trivial one used for political purposes. But as other commenters have noted, it depends upon Congress and the courts. No treasonous act is really treasonous until they decide it is, no matter how treasonous it actually is. Story 14. When he openly invited Russia to hack another candidate's email. When he shared polling data with that country, and they actively interfered in the election. When he threatened to withhold support from an ally if they did not deliver political dirt for him. When he called voting officials and asked them to fabricate numbers. When he incited an insurrection to overthrow the government. This is off the top of my head and before misguided Americans voted him in again. Story 15. Instead of opinionated answers, refer to the source. Treason against the United States shall consist only in levying war against them or in adhering to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort. No person shall be convicted of treason unless on the testimony of 2 witnesses to the same overt act or on confession in open court. Story 16. When his actions are completely indistinguishable from those of someone trying to destroy and destabilize the country, and it persists for this long, I would say we are there. Story 17. We should have passed that point long ago when we found boxes of classified material in his basement bathroom. Story 18. We already reached that point. He was legitimately impeached by the United States Congress, and the United States Senate only declined to convict because some members are Russian assets, some were gleeful ultranationalists, and most were cowards. Watch the impeachment proceedings. They were exceedingly well done. The crimes of Donald Trump, particularly those committed by individuals he placed in power or directed, were fully proven and clearly explained. No one cared. Barely anyone watched. Even some members of the Democratic Party do not know the details of the case and why Donald Trump is considered a traitor. They only use buzzwords like impeached felon and Vladimir Putin's lapdog. He is those things, but why? There is a serious lack of civic engagement in this country that has been pushed by conservatives for decades, and we are now seeing the pinnacle of that decline. Start to care. Teach your children to care. Story 19. For supporters of Donald Trump, there is no such thing. He could literally go on Fox News and offer state secrets in return for children to keep in the White House basement for his Jeffrey Epstein memorial parties, and conservatives would claim it is a political attack. Story 20. This is an interesting question, especially since Donald Trump was re-elected after losing his first re-election. To me, this heavily implies that the divide in this country is extremely deep and troubling. What happens when half your population does not consider a treasonous action treasonous? Is it really treason? If half your population is okay with the country fundamentally changing or ending altogether, on what grounds can you say anyone is betraying the country? The people are the country, and if they want it gone or do not care if it is gone, who is being betrayed? They are simply fulfilling what voters voted for. Story 21. My God, no one has read the Constitution. Treason is the only criminal act defined in the Constitution. The Founding Fathers did not want it used lightly because the English monarchy would throw around treason charges for petty things. The United States Constitution defines treason as giving aid or comfort to the enemy in a time of war. Story 22. I do not know. Ask Republicans. I would respect them more if they acknowledged what was happening and admitted that this is an authoritarian takeover and that they are happy with it. Instead, they dismiss every questioned action as Trump derangement syndrome and act like this is all normal. I always wondered how something like segregation ever existed in this country so recently, not to mention slavery, but now it makes sense. If the power shifts into the Democratic Party's hands, they must hold these people accountable, or we will be back in the same situation very soon. Story 23. Right now, the leader has crossed and recrossed the line repeatedly, but there is no question he is using United States troops to suppress political dissent. Story 24. For a Democratic president, wearing a brown suit in public is acceptable. For a Republican president, it is never acceptable. Sadly, this is not a joke. Story 25. In 2015, he said the election was rigged against him and that he would not accept the results if he lost. Meanwhile, he was holding talks with Vladimir Putin and using hacked information to discredit Hillary Clinton and the Democratic Party. At the same time, he said the Federal Bureau of Investigation was investigating him, which we now know was probably related to the Jeffrey Epstein situation, and that he was the target of a witch hunt. I am sure there is more. Story 26. When he breaks the law for his own gain and violates the Constitution, all of this happened before this term as well. Story 27. I personally thought it would be when the president orchestrated a violent attack on the nation's Capitol building, but I guess others feel differently. Story 28. America is full of white fragility, so most of them are okay with former President Donald Trump for assuaging said fragility. It would be funny if it were not an outright disaster. Story 29. I guess we don't have a bottom. America, as we know it, is gone. Right now, the most incompetent people are in the highest positions of power. There are mass cover-ups. The rich are becoming richer due to promises made and criminal activity. This elderly individual has even increased. their wealth by $3.2 billion in 6 months, and we are under siege in our cities. The courts, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Attorney General's office, are all full of corruption due to recent changes. The person running our immigration system is racist and mistreats animals. This is what it feels like to witness the fall of America. Story 30. If you are asking conservatives, the answer is whenever they have a Democrat next to their name on the ballot. For everyone else, the line was crossed long ago. Story 31. When you plan a riot to overthrow the peaceful transfer of power and cause multiple deaths, stealing classified documents for illegal purposes is unacceptable. Story 32. Donald Trump has acted against the interests of the United States since the 1980s. The question is, when will American citizens take decisive action to address this issue? Story 33. When he spies on people running for president and has fake dossiers created by weaponized law enforcement agencies. Story 34. The classified documents case should have ended Donald Trump's candidacy and his freedom. How it was ever allowed to be delayed is a huge miscarriage of justice, and I think Republicans are usually quite harsh on miscarriages. Story 35. Let us be honest. If January 6th happened right now, today, the instigators would absolutely be charged with treason by the administration. So there is your bar. Story 36. Until the country catastrophically collapses, most of America has no idea or concern about what is going on in government as long as they can still go about their day normally. Once that is disrupted, they begin to pay attention. Story 37. The answer depends on whether you are in a cult. If you are, the answer depends on whether the president is the leader of your cult. If he is not the leader of your cult, then his actions are disloyal. If he is the leader of your cult, he can do anything, and you will make excuses for it. Story 38. Hey Jim, let's ask a liberal website like Reddit what they think of their current Republican president. I'm sure we will all be surprised by the answers. Story 39. When he purposefully provides material aid and comfort to a country we are at war with, which is legally defined as treason. Story 40. As soon as he tries to overthrow a free and fair election, Donald Trump should have been arrested on January 6th. Story 41. When he weaponizes the Department of Justice against a political opponent, when he creates fake Russian collusion files to have a political opponent arrested and investigated, when they manufacture a criminal conspiracy case against a political opponent, which pretty much sums up the Obama and Biden presidencies. Story 42. Not sure there is a line. Honestly, Richard Nixon negotiated with our enemies to prolong the Vietnam War and caused Americans to die to get himself elected. Since then, it has gotten progressively worse. Story 43. The problem is that there must be a governing body to hold him accountable for treasonous acts. We do not have that, so he will continue to get away with criminal and treasonous acts. Story 44. When they start acting in the best interests of any party that is not their own people. So, like 5 decades ago? Story 45. When he willfully violates the constitutional rights of all Americans and yet we let him retire without taking any action. Story 46. There is no action this president can take to be considered treason. He believes that no laws apply to him. The courts will not recognize it, and Congress is too weak to act. Story 47. It is not illegal if you cannot convict someone of a crime. That said, obviously, Donald Trump is a traitor to this country and certainly to the Constitution. Story 48. All of this only works if our built-in checks and balances are functioning. The Republican Party stacked the deck and essentially won the war. If we have clean elections in the midterm, things will start to swing the other way. However, I am not confident we will have clean elections. Story 49. When they have levied war against the United States, or when aiding or adhering to our enemies, or giving them comfort. Story 50. To all Americans, at what point is a president considered to be treasonous? Apparently, giving massive concessions at every possible opportunity to a long-standing enemy nation is not cause for concern. Neither is accepting over $500 million in bribes from adversarial nations and counting all the billions his family is profiting from as a whole. Cannot forget a known sexual predator, child molester, fraudster, thief, dementia-ridden, incompetent, habitual liar. Oh yes, and his policies on governing directly lead to the deaths of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Americans. The man literally told you all to inject yourselves with bleach. However, forget about January 6th and a direct attempt to overthrow the government. He freed all of those criminals, including the ones who viciously attacked and injured police officers, so that does not count anymore, right? The bar is not low. It is burrowed straight into the core of the earth. He has a publicly known KGB code name, for heaven's sake. If Krasnov is not considered treasonous by your people, nobody is, except apparently if they have non-white skin or a Democrat next to their name. Having a black president was apparently such a hard line that over half the country developed some kind of suicidal mental illness. Story 51. It is an absolute disgrace that Donald Trump never appeared in court for January 6th. The Department of Justice under President Joe Biden completely failed the country. Story 52. Acting in the best interest of yourself over the nation you were elected to represent. Too many acts of betrayal to choose just one. Forget red versus blue. The internet created the perfect environment for this destructive outcome. Story 53. Unfortunately, when Congress decides he is, in better days, presidents were held accountable by their own party if they ran afoul of the law and the Constitution. Today, party loyalty is protected over the very Constitution that empowers them. Story 54. Probably when he prepares 7 forged elector slates from 7 different states and then has his loyal militias break into the Capitol building if that plan did not work. Story 55. In the United States of America, treason is one of a very short list of crimes that is defined or even mentioned by the Constitution. To commit treason basically means waging war against the country on behalf of a foreign power. The literal answer to your question is that the president is considered treasonous when he is working on behalf of another country to attack the United States. Is the current president treasonous? I would say yes, but I acknowledge that it would be very hard to prove in a court of law. With the disturbing number of extremists who would support him, it would likely be even harder to convict. Story 56. Inciting a violent attack on the United States Capitol, playing fast and loose with the Constitution, and outright violating it certainly does it for me. Story 57. When he asked for Russia's help at the first debate with Hillary Clinton in 2015, he should have been handcuffed immediately. Story 58. It was well before January 6, 2021. It was around the time that he stood in front of the Central Intelligence Agency Wall of Honor and sided with Russian intelligence over United States intelligence. Story 59. January 6, 2021. Was one of the most defining moments in American history for acts of treason. However, we resorted to half measures when dealing with the culprits. Story 60. It really depends. Is it treason by wealthy people or by poor people? If they are wealthy, then there is no threshold. If you are poor, you are pushing it just by asking this question. Story 61. When he committed treason by telling his supporters to go to the Capitol on January 6th, he should be in prison right now and not out walking around like all of the January 6th rioters he pardoned. Story 62. I wish we could move past the former president of the United States and move on as a country. He represents so much hatred and only fuels an already angry person's soul. Story 63. Trying to overturn an election and then later stealing classified documents and refusing to return them. Story 64. Given that the Supreme Court has granted all presidents full immunity from any actions, treason is now only an accusation that the President of the United States can make against others. Story 65. When there is a Democrat behind their name, if there is a Republican, everything they do is righteous, and to disagree means you hate babies and Jesus. Story 66. For me, it was when he tried to pretend COVID-19 was not happening after he had disbanded the pandemic response team and let many people die. However, I think most people say January 6th. Story 67. Treason was never properly defined in the Constitution, so it depends on when the United States Congress and the Supreme Court feel that it is politically advantageous to declare that the president is treasonous. Unfortunately, they are just as treasonous as the president. Story 68. When he kept being friends with fascists, when he stored boxes of top-secret confidential files in the bathroom and then the Federal Bureau of Investigation could not find some of them, when the Russians were trying to get him elected, he should have been put in prison for the felonies. We all act like the law means something, but it does not. Story 69. Legally, we are past it, but if the people responsible for upholding the law are not taking action and the citizens are not demanding it, then it does not actually matter. Story 70. Depends on who you ask. For some, wearing a tan suit and being black was enough to deserve prison. But inciting violence at the nation's capital and trying to get your own vice president murdered is totally acceptable. I suppose this is how you see things when you are a racist. Story 71. Every day he still sits in the office and his entire administration is not forcibly removed, which only further increases my disgust in humanity. The fact that I even need to list any reasons beyond the fact that he raped children is abhorrent. However, I am sure some person who always wears American flag shirts will try to tell me every reason why I am wrong for having morals. Story 72. The Republicans in Congress are complicit with Trump's behavior and will never indict him, as he will retaliate and push them out of office. The Democrats in Congress, with the exception of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, often choose to reach across the aisle to compromise rather than take a strong stand. At this point, we need to remove all of them and start over. Story 73. Do you want a legal, political, or societal definition? All of them will be different and will depend on people's individual perspectives. The greatest problem with this question is that no one will agree on a line because people do not unanimously agree on who is a friend or foe or what treason even means in the context of a president, even if it is written into law. At the end of the day, public acceptance will mean everything, but historically most of the United States' actions have been entirely self-interested. So even between the two political parties, the goal was typically to bring success and security to America, even if there was corruption influencing decisions. However, now it is arguable that we have never had a more reasonable cause to believe the executive is compromised by a foreign government and is possibly an asset. Story 74. By the very narrow definition of treason laid out in the United States Constitution, it may be tough to qualify the leader of the executive branch as having committed treason by its very specific wording. The position is empowered to make a large range of decisions pertaining to things like foreign policy and military decisions. Even the power of classification, minus a few instances, originates from the office of the President of the United States, so sharing state secrets openly with the world or another world leader would not necessarily rise to the definition, even if the other nation is not an ally or is generally opposed to the United States. If the United States were at war with another nation and the president was feeding the opposition our war plans, then it would at least meet the qualifier of aid or comfort to an enemy. However, the president being the commander-in-chief means he can somewhat do whatever he wants with the military. Waging war on the United States would be an even tougher box to check since the president is the leader of the United States military, and you kind of need a military to wage war. While I agree January 6th was an attempt to prevent the proper course of democracy and can be viewed as waging war on the United States, none of the people involved were charged with treason, so it is not likely the former president would be either. It seems the lawyers and others did not feel it rose to that level. Treason was very intentionally defined to have a lofty bar because the founding fathers did not want it to be weaponized against opponents of the system or people in the system. They saw how the king would behave and did not want it to be a scenario where everything is labeled treason just to execute the opposition. It would have to be clear-cut, documented, unquestionably evident, and admitted to by the president. Then Congress would need to impeach and remove the president. Then the Department of Justice, part of the executive branch, would need to bring charges, and the Supreme Court of the United States would have to approve that the actions did not constitute official protected acts of the office. None of this seems likely to happen when it is party over country for the majority of Congress and the Supreme Court, and the president is of that party. Story 75. In a functional society with a functional government, this would have been addressed the first time former President Donald Trump engaged in a quid pro quo with Ukraine. But here we are. Half of our elected officials support him, and a large portion of the country will believe anything they hear on Fox News. Story 76. January 6th proved that Donald Trump is a traitor. The fact that he is back in office says a lot about the electorate, and none of it is good. Story 77. That moment was a long time ago. Many of us are either organizing in small ways, following someone who organizes for us, or waiting for others to take action. I became a precinct committee person because it is more important than ever to help in local elections on March 17, 2026. We need people in office like Governor Pritzker and Governor Newsom who will fight back and protect the people. The least we can do as citizens is to stay informed, inform others, and vote. Register to vote and request a mail-in ballot. Story 78. For Republicans and those who protect pedophiles, a president is not considered treasonous only when the president is not Donald Trump. As long as the president is Donald Trump, these protectors will continue to protect pedophiles. Story 79. For Republicans, it's when you are elected as a Democrat. For everyone else, it should be the standard definition of treason. That is when a person knowingly does not act in the interests of the country. Story 80. Many people have been calling Donald Trump a traitor for years. There seems to be plenty of evidence that he is, at the very least, a Russian asset in the sense of a useful idiot. According to Yuri Shvets, a former major in the Komitet Gosударственной безопасности, Donald Trump first did business over 40 years ago with a Manhattan electronics store co-owned by a Soviet emigre who Shvets believes was working with the Komitet Gosударственной безопасности. Trump's decision to do business there triggered protocols through which the Soviet spy agency began efforts to cultivate Trump as an asset, thus launching a decades-long relationship of mutual benefit to Russia and Trump, from real estate to real power. Trump's invitation to Moscow in 1987 was billed as a preliminary scouting trip for a hotel, but according to Shvets, was actually initiated by a high-level Komitet Gosударственной безопасности official, General Ivan Gromyko. These sorts of trips were usually arranged for deep development, recruitment, or for a meeting with the Komitet Gosударственной безопасности handlers, even if the potential asset was unaware of it. In 1987, according to Shvets, the Komitet Gosударственной безопасности circulated an internal cable hailing the successful execution of an active measure by a newly cultivated American asset who took out full-page advertisements in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Boston Globe promoting policies favored by the Komitet Gosударственной безопасности. The ads had been taken out by Donald Trump, who, Shvets said, would become a special unofficial contact for the Komitet Gosударственной безопасности, that is, an intelligence asset whose role has been compared to that of the late industrialist Armand Hammer. Text of Donald Trump's 1987 advertisement. There is nothing wrong with America's foreign defense policy that a little backbone cannot cure. The advertisement's headline states, below, the reader finds an open letter from Donald J. Trump addressed to the American people on why America should stop paying to defend countries that can afford to defend themselves. The advertisements appeared in the papers on September 2, 1987. According to an Associated Press story published the night before they appeared in print, Trump paid $94,801 to run the advertisements. For decades, Japan and other nations have been taking advantage of the United States. The letter declares, the saga continues unabated as we defend the Persian Gulf, an area of only marginal significance to the United States for its oil supplies, but one upon which Japan and others are almost totally dependent. Why are these nations not paying the United States for the human lives and billions of dollars we are losing to protect their interests? The advertisement continues. The world is laughing at America's politicians as we protect ships we do not own, carrying oil we do not need, destined for allies who will not help. Donald Trump writes that Americans could help our farmers, our sick, are homeless by taking from some of the greatest profit machines ever created, machines created and nurtured by us. Tax these wealthy nations, not America, suggests the tycoon. End our huge deficits, reduce our taxes, and let America's economy grow unencumbered by the cost of defending those who can easily afford to pay us for the defense of their freedom. Let us not let our great country be laughed at anymore. Trump's letter concludes. Two testimonies from former Komitet Gosударственной безопасности agents living on different continents support these claims. It appears that Vladimir Putin has control over Donald Trump. He is not necessarily an agent, but seems to be managed and influenced as an asset or at least a useful idiot. For example, from 2016 to 2019, the bulk of Donald Trump's first term, Russia paid countries for United States soldiers, while Trump praised Vladimir Putin on the international stage. Donald Trump praised Vladimir Putin then and continues to do so now. It appears that Donald Trump has been under Russian influence for decades. Does Vladimir Putin have compromising material on Donald Trump? Maybe. That is how they manipulated many Western businessmen back then, but it is also possible that it is the result of decades of grooming and manipulation. Either way, many people are saying it. Some even claim that Vladimir Putin possesses videotapes of Donald Trump engaging in terrible acts involving minors. Alnur Musayev, former head of Kazakhstan's State Security Service, claims Vladimir Putin holds compromising documents and recordings targeting Donald Trump. The alleged material includes evidence of sexual crimes against minors and financial dealings tied to Russia, Kazakhstan, and other former Soviet states. There is also the existing knowledge regarding Jeffrey Epstein. The question remains, does Vladimir Putin have the tapes? Story 81. When Agent Orange watched the insurrection at the Capitol and did nothing for almost 2 hours. Story 82. Has been for a long time. Connections to Russia date back to before 2016, involving his child exploitation beauty pageant ring. Story 83. When he conspires against the incoming president and uses intelligence agencies to fabricate scenarios and stories to discredit the legitimacy of a duly elected government official. Story 84. Treason is a very specific thing, proving absolutely that a president is acting directly as an agent of a foreign power is not an easy task. How a president did not face sedition charges for January 6th is a bigger question. Story 85. Read the list of grievances against King Charles in the Declaration of Independence. Donald Trump has committed almost all of them. Story 86. The president had already reached that point long ago when the January 6th event happened. I strongly dislike this administration. I want to leave and be on a more balanced timeline. Story 87. The actual answer. Title 18 of the United States Code, Section 2381, says, whoever, owing allegiance to the United States, levies war against them or adheres to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort within the United States or elsewhere, is guilty of treason and shall suffer death, or be imprisoned and fined, and be incapable of holding any United States office. Story 88. Treason is narrowly and specifically defined in our Constitution as only levying war against the United States or adhering to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort. Based on that, it never applies. What people often call treason is actually a rebuke of American values or institutions but does not meet the legal definition. Story 89. Cleaning up America, deporting undocumented immigrants, and implementing reciprocal tariffs all sound great to most of us, including me. When a president acts against the interests of the country, it is considered treasonous. Most Americans think President Donald Trump is doing a great job. Therefore, no, he is not a traitor. Reddit is an echo chamber. Story 90. If they have a registered trademark next to their name, never, apparently. If they have a director next to their name as soon as they breathe. Story 91. There has already been so much that any other president would have been forced to resign or been impeached and removed forcibly. But that has not happened in this case. The entire Republican Party is corrupt, and Donald Trump has made the government corrupt and compromised to the point that the very concept of justice no longer seems to exist. To answer your question, if Donald Trump allows Russia onto Alaskan soil to mine rare earth minerals, then that would be a treasonous act deserving immediate removal and indictment on the charge of high treason. Russia is an enemy of the United States, not an ally in any sense of the word, and they should not be allowed onto American soil for any reason. We will see. As previously stated, there is little to no justice in this country right now. Even the so-called Department of Justice under Pam Bondi is more like the Department of Injustice because she is a Trump loyalist and has weaponized the Department of Justice to do his personal bidding, not to administer and enforce the laws of the United States except as it furthers Donald Trump's own personal whims. That is not justice. That is criminality, corruption, and treason. Story 92. On January 6th, when he had his followers storm the Capitol, no one in power took action. Story 93. I think we already reached that point. What sickens me is the massive list of people who are on record in voice and print stating their disdain for the current president. Many say he should not be president. Many say he is compromised. Many support the Russiagate investigation and consensus. Many compare him to Hitler. These are not average Americans. These are current and some previous politicians, as well as commentators in the major media networks. Many, even on Fox News, have called him out for various decisions he made in the past. Many spoke out against him after January 6th. Most of these people have since done a complete reversal and now fully support him. Some are in his current administration, including his Secretary of State and the Vice President. The mental gymnastics it takes, as a human being with integrity and conscience, to walk back on your past statements to avoid consequences is utterly mind-blowing. It just sickens me. Story 94. When they start violating the Constitution, disobeying court orders, or giving confidential information to our enemies. Donald Trump has definitely done the first two. He has likely done the last one as well. Story 95. The way you worded the question makes me feel like it is up to each of us to draw our own conclusion. For the current individual, it was January 6, 2021, when he incited his followers to try to overturn the government because his feelings were hurt that he lost the election and could not intimidate his way to a win. Story 96. Technically, only while aiding an enemy during wartime. That being said, former President Donald Trump and the Make America Great Again movement hate America and our values. Story 97. Opinions depend on the individual. My parents claimed Bill Clinton was treasonous for the Lewinsky incident. Although he was a poor husband and boss, it was not treason. They viewed Barack Obama as the Antichrist and claimed they are not racist, while supporting Donald Trump as doing what the country needs. Meanwhile, I can acknowledge that Clinton was not great but was the better option. Obama could have performed better, but his worst scandal that was genuine was wearing a tan suit, so I would say he could have been much worse. Our current leader should have been put in prison long ago to serve time for his actions, but he has the money and loyal followers to prevent that from happening. I dislike this timeline. Story 98. The second he says something that is not completely in line with what I say and believe, because I value my life based on how other people talk and need them to validate my otherwise wasted life. Story 99. He should never have won the first time. The moment he made fun of a person with special needs should have been the end of his campaign. Story 100. January 6, 2021. Arguably before that even, but that was a watershed event in which he should have been walked out of the White House in handcuffs. Story 101. Are we going to ignore when President Joe Biden saluted North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, praised Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, and hosted Russian President Vladimir Putin on American soil? Or when President Biden took top-secret documents, stored them insecurely in a bathroom, refused to return them, and even shared them with others? He was investigated for espionage before being elected and worked to end that investigation. Or how about when President Biden allegedly incited actions against the United States Capitol and elections? Or when he turned the military against American citizens? Isn't that treason to most Americans? Oh wait, some believe that President Biden trying to help people pay off student loans is treason. They will never let go of their strong allegiance to former President Donald Trump. Trump is focused on himself and would sell America for $1 if it benefited him in any way. Story 102. When the Occupational Safety and Health Administration prevents you from earning a living because you refuse to get a vaccine with emergency use authorization. Story 103. If they have deliberately neglected or broken their oath to protect and defend the Constitution, or have refused to comply with the separation of powers between branches of government, fomenting an insurrection to prevent the peaceful transfer of power also seems like a serious offense. While the legal definition is to levy war or provide aid and comfort to the enemy, it is difficult to apply treason when a declared war is not in effect. Story 104. United States District Court, Central District of California. Case number EDCB 16-00797. Donald J. Trump and Jeffrey E. Epstein. Complaint for claim relief due to 1. Sexual abuse under threat of harm. 2. Conspiracy to deprive civil rights. Parties. 1. The plaintiff, Katie Johnson, resides in the state of California. 2. The defendants, Donald J. Trump and Jeffrey E. Epstein, each reside in the state of New York. Warning. The details are extremely graphic. Story 105. Legally speaking, long before this, on January 6, 2020, if not before. The problem is finding anyone willing to enforce the laws. So far, all the people with weapons seem to be on the side of treason. Story 106. We have already reached it. When will he and his evil followers be removed and prosecuted? Story 107. Well, technically, according to the Supreme Court, the president cannot commit a crime. Therefore, nothing the president does is treasonous according to the Supreme Court. However, in my opinion, this has already happened with Trump and, surprisingly, Biden. There were moments during the Biden administration when I was not sure who was in charge, as he was escorted away by his handlers. Story 108. The bottom line truth is that, at its core, the Make America Great Again movement's cultural side is about preserving or restoring a social order where one group, mainly white, Christian, and male, has the most political, economic, and cultural dominance, even if they do not frame it that bluntly. Instead, they dress it up in coded language, nostalgia, or abstract ideals. Great again is a sanitized way of saying, back to when my group ran everything. Protect traditional values is often a cover for resisting diversity and equality. Law and order is frequently used to target minority communities without openly saying so. It is blunt in effect but clever in presentation. The louder the insistence that it is not about race or dominance, the more it often is. It is a kind of collective denial, not just for optics, but because the narrative only works if the participants believe they are defending America, not a social hierarchy. Story 109. When he attempts to overthrow the government and the will of the people, he did all of that in 2020, and the Republicans just do not care as long as it is their guy committing the treason. Story 110. I do not even know what our government does anymore. Our administration is harboring criminals and befriending our enemies. They talk about solving problems, but they are the ones who harm the nation and need to be removed immediately. Story 111. He has been treasonous for some time, prioritizing hostile countries over our own. If only Congress were not full of incompetent individuals who do not understand their purpose in government. Story 112. Treasonous? The moment he takes any form of payment outside of his position. Treasonous to the point of successful prosecution and possible execution? He would have to be actively trying to kill or sabotage one of the United States of America's biggest bondholders who was an active citizen. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.